Alleged child sex kingpin Gerhard Ackerman is behind bars after he contravened his bail conditions and went missing on Friday. He was rearrested yesterday in Florida, that's in the west of Johannesburg. Ackerman is facing 740 charges ranging from rape, attempted murder, distribution of child pornography, human trafficking of minor children for sexual exploitation. Now, in light of the latest developments on this show this morning, we asked the question, should rape suspects qualify for bail? Well, to discuss this further, we're joined by Marius Toit, a former prosecutor and magistrate, now a director at Toit Attorneys Incorporated. And we're joined also by Reverend June Dolley, director of the NPC Walk in the Shoes of Survivors. To both of you, my thanks for joining us for this important discussion. Can I start with you, Reverend, and ask you the question, when someone like Gerhard Ackerman decides to violate their bail conditions, just how vulnerable are his potential victims and those, by the way, that might testify against him in court?
Thank you for having me. They are quite vulnerable, actually, and not just them, but, you know, the fact that he has 740 charges against him says that he's a serial rapist and offender. And so we're also seeing in the reports that the victims, his victims, many of them are suicidal. And when you release someone who has raped you or groomed you or used you for trafficking, it has an effect on you. And so, yes, you are extremely fearful. You are frightened. You have trauma responses. You have triggers. So constantly to live in the fear and look over your shoulders as to see whether he is down, is he coming back. So when a system releases someone back into society for bail, and the fact that he just got 6,000 rand for his bail, even though he had 740 charges, serious charges against him, it's a slap in the face of the victims. It's really honestly raping the victims all over again. And so, yes, it's quite a scary, it's very scary for a victim to go through this and potential witnesses.
Marius, let's bring you into the conversation. What is the responsibility of the state as someone who is a former prosecutor? What becomes the responsibility of the law enforcement authorities when someone like this is released on bail? Are there not supposed to be some monitoring systems here?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when a person is considered to be granted bail, the test is whether this person ultimately is a flight risk, whether there's risk to the victims, whether he will reoffend whilst he's out on bail. So if all those conditions have been met, we must remember that bail doesn't have a penal nature to it. We're not punishing the accused. We are just securing his attendance at court so that at the end of the day, justice can prevail, and whatever that justice may be. But I'm absolutely in agreement with the Reverend that, you know, victims are traumatized by our court system. We cannot negate that. It is very serious. However, the first question, of course, remains, why did this person in the first place get bail? 740 charges, you have to ask yourself, were there not sufficient grounds to have denied him bail? But bail has now been granted. And now when the person is released on bail, obviously, at the end of the day, provided that the conditions that are set to bail are such to ensure that this person attends court. And in this instance, he was not supposed to leave the area without the consent of the IO. He was supposed to report. And provided those measures are met, he's entitled to remain on bail. However, the moment he reaches any of those conditions, then the state has all the right to go back to court and say, wait, I want to apply for a warrant to have this person arrested and to have his bail cancelled. But I think to go back, one must first ask, why was bail granted here in the first instance? And that begs a big question.
Yeah, and that's something that I think you're going to have to flesh out for us as we continue with this discussion. Reverend, let me come back to you. So the details around his rearrest after absconding bail, I mean, the victims, his victims, I cannot imagine what would have been going through their minds when they saw this in the media, that this is someone who actually perpetrated the most egregious crime against me. the members of the public were the ones who actually apprehended this person. Only then did the police quickly come to the scene. Surely the community has every reason to doubt the criminal justice system in South Africa. Should there be laws that simply say, if you are charged with sex crimes, you're not to be granted bail? We understand you're not found guilty, but you are charged with sex crimes. You could potentially reoffend while out on bail.
100% correct. And we have to thank the media here as well, because it was the media who acted swiftly to get his photographs out there and that the community could then respond to it. If that did not happen, then God forbid what would have happened after that. Just as Mr. Toit said, there's criteria that gets used when somebody is granted bail. And obviously they look at the circumstances of the accused as well as circumstances of the crime. And the circumstance of the crime was quite serious, 740 charges, rape, attempted murder, trafficking of our children, etc. So the community is angered. It's not the first time that someone released on bail absconds from bail, and then this is what happens. And we do not consider the victims in all of this. Somehow the system focuses mostly on the perpetrator. And we see in 2019, even President Ramaphosa said that he supports no bail for those charged of rape and murder. But we don't see this happening. And the fact that, again, I reiterate what Mr. Toit said, why was bail granted? 740 charges. And so, yes, we do thank the community was vigilant, because at the end of the day, the perpetrator is sent back into the communities. The fact that he's out on 6,000 Rand bail, told not to have a cell phone, told not to have a laptop, how can you tell an adult not to have that? They can say, yes, I won't, but chances are they are going to have that. And what we're putting on our victims is not secondary abuse, but it's basically rape, as I said again. And what we're doing to them, they become suicidal. And when that happens, blood is on the hands of the state, and we have to be more serious. If we look at our stats in South Africa, the abuse of children, attempted murder of children, the murder rate of children is extremely high, and it's on the increase. And we as society, as the state, as the NPA, the judiciary, we need to be more strict when it comes to dealing with perpetrators of sexual offences.
Yeah. Marius, let's come to you. And you have heard the Reverend say, should anything happen, should this alleged perpetrator re-offend while on bail, the blood is on the hands of the state. She reminds me of the Hilary Gadi case, where the family is now suing the state because they're saying, had this person who was released on parole, had they not been out in the streets, our child would probably still be alive. So the question then to you, Marius, from what you know as a former practicing prosecutor, what systems were in place, or what systems are supposed to be in place when someone like this is released on bail? I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but the general public has got to know what the responsibility of the police is when someone like this is released on bail.
So first and foremost, we have the Criminal Procedure Act, and Section 60 of the Criminal Procedure Act, now I don't want to get too technical, lays down certain provisions which must be met before a person can be permitted to bail. Where we deal with rape of an adult victim or sexual assault of a minor, in those instances it falls under Schedule 5. And when an accused is confronted with a Schedule 5, his right to bail is removed, and he may now only be released on bail if the interest of justice demands it. And he bears the onus on a balance of probabilities to convince the court that he should be permitted to bail. So under those offences, what you would expect is that the person is employed, the person has a family, he has a passport, but he hasn't used it. So you'd look at all the normal circumstances as well as the victims, and then consider, should this person be permitted to bail? The moment you deal with rape of a minor, you now fall into the category of Schedule 6 offences. Now, Schedule 6 offences, typically speaking, deal with premeditated murder. It deals with armed robbery and murder. It deals with rape of minor children. It deals with multiple charges of rape. Now, from what I understand, Yakoli, we understand that there are 760 charges, and several of them pertain to rape. So if that is so, then we say, well, the checks and balances in this matter ought to have been with a Schedule 6 bail application. Now, what does that mean? A Schedule 6 bail application means that you can only get bail if you are able to satisfy the court on a balance of probabilities that exceptional circumstances exist. Now, let me just say this. The fact that you and I are employed, the fact that we have a house, the fact that we have a family, that we are domiciled in an area and we've got no previous convictions, those are not exceptional. What is exceptional often is the fact that I have a watertight alibi. The case against me is very weak. The fact that I might be dying from an illness and I'm literally on my last legs. Those could be exceptional in the circumstances. So you have to ask yourself the question, if we dealt here with the Schedule 6 bail application, where we're dealing with 706 charges, of which several of them pertain to rape, and we can only assume if it's child porn, then the victims ought to be children. And that, of course, begs the question, how was this person able to surmount a case strong enough to prove exceptional circumstances? Because I can tell you, it is not easy to prove exceptional circumstances. I've done many bail applications, and often you fail under Schedule 6, knowing how big or how high the hurdle is that you have to surmount. So, how bail was granted in the first place, I don't know. But what I can tell you is the checks and balances are in place so that the magistrate who has judicial oversight over the matter and considers the bail application is placed in the best possible position. And keeping in mind, this is not a person sitting on the side. A magistrate should be active in the bail proceedings. He should, if he needs to call for further evidence, he can call for authority. If he needs something more to make sure that he's able to satisfy any concerns that he has, he must do so.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, the checks and balances are there, but how were they overcome in granting bail here? Did the state concede that the case against the accused is very weak? Did the state concede they didn't have enough evidence on the rape charges? I do not know. But bail was granted, and I agree with the Reverend. 6,000 Rand bail under these circumstances does not seem like much. Often 6,000 Rand is granted for a vehicle theft.
Yeah.
It's granted, for murder, you look at 10,000 Rand. So obviously bail amount is subject to the accused circumstances. I mean, a rich person will get a lot more bail than a person that's poor. But having said that, 6,000 Rand in the circumstances doesn't sound like much.
Reverend Dolley, let's come back to you as we wrap up the conversation now. Should it come to light, should it eventuate that this person, after having violated his bail conditions, might actually be eligible to get bail again, what should the stance of the victims be? In fact, let's actually talk to society. What should the role of society be? Are we agitating at all for bail not to be granted to such people?
I think definitely as society, we need to make a stand. We cannot be silent, because when we are silent, we are enabling the system, we're enabling the perpetrator. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect me or my family personally. We live in a spirit of Ubuntu. I am because you are. And when we start speaking up together as a collective voice, we can make a change. There's power in our voices. And God forbid he does receive bail, because I think there's going to be a huge outcry from society, from communities. And what again are we saying, not just to his victims, but to other victims as well. So I do believe we've recently had the second presidential GBV summit, and the president said we must keep him to his word. And I think it's by time we start doing exactly that. We hold those in power accountable, because bail and parole of offenders need to come to an end when it involves rape, when it involves murder. And so definitely, I think as society, we've had enough now, and it's by time we have our voices heard, and that we speak out, and that we not just accept what is handed down to us. And I truly feel that the whole bail application in this particular case needs to be investigated as to what grounds that magistrate used and what criteria was used to actually grant him bail after 740 serious crimes, of which were Schedules 5 and 6 crimes. So I truly believe that we should not just leave it there, but a further investigation needs to take place.
Reverend June Dolley, let me thank you very much for your time this morning and enlightening us. She's director of the NPC Walk in the Shoes of Survivors. And we also thank Marius Toit. He is a former prosecutor and magistrate, now a director at Toit Attorneys Incorporated. Thanks indeed for your time. All right.